Hi everyone, hola, I'm Juliet Menendez, and in honor of Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm going to be talking with educators about ways that they celebrate Latinidad. With Latinitas coming out in Spanish in just a few days, and now that both versions are available, I thought it would be a good idea to reach out to an old friend of mine, Dr. Alain Bengochea, who works specifically in dual language and bilingual education. Dr. Alain Bengochea is a professor at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas and has published numerous articles about emergent bilingualism in early and middle childhood. I know him from way back when we were New York City teaching fellows, taking night classes at Fordham and sharing long subway rides together. I'm so happy he's here with us today, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Alain. How are you doing?
Hi, Juliet. How's it going? Good.
So, Alain, can you just say a little bit of your background?
My name is Alain Bengochea. I'm an assistant professor of English language learning at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I was born in Miami to Cuban and Venezuelan immigrants. Juliet and I started our venture into bilingual education together in New York City. She was working in Manhattan, in Washington Heights, while I was working in the Bronx. That's where I started my journey. And after that, I decided to pursue a career as an academic in the field of bilingual education. And that's why I studied language and literacy learning in multilingual settings at the University of Miami. I spent a lot of time in preschool dual language classrooms in Miami, and much of my studies are written about this context. So what I witnessed was children's naturally occurring interactions in this space in early childhood settings, obviously, in differing activities. So those activities consisted of show and tell, shared readings, a lot of research on dramatic play, and things like that, capturing what children were naturally able to do. And after I graduated with my doctorate, I sought a postdoc at The Ohio State University. I had an amazing opportunity to work in an indigenous community in Mexico.
Yes, please talk about that.
So specifically working with Yucatec Maya Spanish speakers. So what our team was doing was basically providing a family literacy opportunity for these families to engage their preschool age children on how to access print, right? Or access the meaning of these bilingual storybooks that were written in Maya, which is rare to find. In fact, my team at the helm was Dr. Laura Justice. She hired someone to transcribe in Maya these stories for kids. To my knowledge, I think those are the only children's books available in Yucatec Maya, right?
That's such a wonderful project. Thank you so much for doing that. If you could briefly talk a little bit about the benefits of dual language and bilingual education. Because I know for a lot of immigrant families, they might have been told that the best way to learn English is to just stop speaking Spanish.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm an assistant professor in an English language learning program. My research, although I teach to promote second language learning, I teach to recognize kids' home languages, despite the emphasis on the English. There's this wide held belief that we need to really transition kids among the Latinos. That we should transition kids to English as quickly as possible. There's overwhelming research that shows that bilingual instruction and being a good language model, whatever language you speak, is preferable for language development and academic performance. In fact, we know that bilingual education programs have overwhelmingly shown that regardless of your language background, regardless if you started off as a monolingual English speaker or you started off as a Spanish speaker, in these programs, they tend to fare better than their counterparts in English-only programs. So if we're talking about reading outcomes and math outcomes, those kids who have received bilingual instruction tend to outperform or do just as well as or outperform those kids who had gotten English-only instruction. So there are cognitive benefits. We know that bilingualism delays the onset of dementia. There's these ideas that you are a better problem solver. There's research around that. You have greater cognitive flexibility. Then there are academic benefits that I've already mentioned. There are the cultural benefits. You have access to greater and more diverse literatures, right, around the the world. You open yourself up to different networks. Definitely, you'll have economic benefits in the long term, increased economic opportunities as well due to being bilingual, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's this misconception about bilingual students because if, say, they are recent immigrants or their families speak primarily Spanish or whatever language they speak at home and it's different from what they're learning in school, there's this idea that somehow they need to catch up or that they're behind when actually they're adding a whole new skill. And while in that, transition phase, it may seem like they're catching up, that's a huge benefit to them that now they have both of these languages, and as you mentioned, have new cognitive abilities and different skills that they have specifically because they have that. I'm really glad that you talked about that. So one of the reasons that, I wanted to talk with you today was because you had ideas about how to use Latinitas now that it's in both Spanish and English, how to use it with students. And I would love to hear your ideas about that.
I mean, there are many ideas that come to mind. Like I mentioned earlier, much of my research is focusing on translanguaging and finding ways that kids could use their entire linguistic repertoire, meaning all their languages at once, right?
So wait, can you just pause for any listeners who don't know what translanguaging is and just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so translanguaging kind of, in some ways, it replaces this idea of code switching. So code switching is this idea that you shuttle from one language to the next, right, between two separate codes, whereas the translanguaging perspective thinks of those two separate codes as one code, because in authentic interactive spaces, such as when you go to a supermarket in a Latinx community, such as one in New York, you don't separate your two codes. Authentic communication means that you'll be engaging in what's called translanguaging, right? You're just going to fluidly draw on whatever labels, whatever terms you ascribe to find the best meaning or intention behind your message.
Right, which would be essentially like Spanglish, right?
Spanglish, one could say, yeah.
Which we definitely talk all the time, but just to clarify. But your definition was better. I just wanted to.
So I tend to, among my teachers who are teaching in English medium settings, I try to promote this idea of having a translanguaging stance where following or engaging in translanguaging pedagogy, which is the work of Ofelia Garcia. My work adopts that stance. So with that in mind, what I find really fruitful about your books, both in English and Spanish, is that you can provide opportunities to engage in what Ofelia also refers to as translanguaging spaces, to have these hybrid forms of communication between texts. I mean, that's a possibility too, right? So some ideas could be having heterogeneous groups to discuss the texts. I would also say that you could have homogeneous groups that focus on the Spanish text separately from the English text, right? And have those two groups separate from one another.
You mean that like in a dual language classroom where you would have English in one classroom and Spanish in the other, where they would be reading the text in both classrooms, or what exactly are you referring to?
I mean, it depends on the intention of the teacher, the purpose of the lesson, right? So if you have a child who's emerging in their English development, you want that child probably to engage with the Spanish text one day to kind of build that child's confidence, right? But then gradually kind of build them up and provide that support and scaffold them to gradually access that English text, maybe at the end of the week, right? That's a possibility. There's also, you could use the preview, view, review framework. So for instance, if a teacher's reading, let's say she's going to be teaching, she's the English model teacher in a dual language classroom, the teachers could strategically choose to use the preview, view, review framework within their teaching. So meaning that you could preview the content of the book in one language. The next day, or even the same day, you could conduct a shared reading, right? Whatever the focus of the lesson was, in the home language of the child, to kind of just strengthen their understandings, right? So that's one thing you could do. So to take a deeper dive, you could have them cross-linguistically and critically evaluate language, content, and the structures of both of your texts. I was just talking about the content mostly in my last example, but you could have students compare whether it's with your support as a teacher, or have them do it in across groups, in identifying, where they might find cognates across both books. Find the differences in the way that our author, Juliet Menendez, crafted her book, right? So sometimes we know that expressions in Spanish cannot be easily translated from English, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's very hard to make it
Yeah.
kind of,
So there are better expressions
can't
that
be
you could use.
literal, right?
Yeah. So you could have students begin to find those expressions across languages, and that could be a really helpful way to help them become biographers themselves, right? Why take a deep dive and analyze the structures of language or vocabulary words and all that? Well, the intention is that ideally you could have these books or these excerpts serve as anchor texts. And
So kids could write their own
biographies or a
and
biography
they
of
could use
someone
this
else.
as a structure, and maybe they could even put their dreams, because we don't know what they're going to do when they're older, but as part of their story or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yes,
I
exactly.
think that's a great idea.
I mean, that's required of all standards across the country. I'm assuming in other countries as well, the expectation is that children should be able to engage with informational text, but also construct their own informational text, in this case, a biography, right?
I love that idea. Yeah.
We want to make sure that these histories feel authentic. We want them to be as grounded to the actual lived experiences of these individuals, right? We want kids to be able to relate to these stories, right? And many of these kids already come with a lot of knowledge about their backgrounds and ways that they communicate about certain ideas or aspects of their home lives, right? This aligns with all the work that's been done on culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies, right? We become better doers of school when our experiences are built upon within a school setting. So,
right.
And I know that you've done your research of these people. I mean, I know that you've even interviewed some of these people to learn about their lived experiences. I think that's really important for authors to do when they're writing biographies. For instance, that's the reason why there's such a focus on narratives when you first enter school. Before you move on to informational text and crafting informational text, teachers ask of students, let's write personal narratives, because we want to build off of what kids know first, and then kind of introduce these more academic concepts, for instance, into their repertoire. Other ideas that I had was you could create a unit of study. You could make that your theme, fighting for a cause, and embed these texts across languages, and then supplement them with videos, with informational text. We know that Juana Azurduy de Padilla was a military leader, right? Policarpa was a spy. These were women who were rebellious and fighting for a cause, right? So for instance, I saw the word rebel in a few of your excerpts. So that is definitely a word you want to teach, because it's important to the text to understand who these people are and to understand their plight, right? Also, it also aligns with the major theme of fighting for a cause, being rebellious. And it's also a tier 2 word. And a tier 2 word are those general academic words that appear across content areas, right? They're not those easily imageable words that are easily acquired. And they're not those tier 3 words which are really content specific. You might want to teach rebelde, rebeldía, rebellious, and so on, right? And showing what those cognates might look like morphemically, right? The point of teaching cognates also is that it's a generative word learning strategy as well. So once you teach kids how to break up some of these words that are found in these texts, they could begin acquiring more words. What teachers should consider doing is also finding ways in which these women were real trailblazers, and compare them perhaps to their existing classroom library, and finding other trailblazers in the classroom library, and why these women are so important, and ways that they differ, and ways that they are similar to those figures that are found in those books that already existed in their classroom library. I think that's a really important thing to discuss, and asking ourselves, why were they not included in our classroom libraries from the start? Those are questions to be had.
They are, and also what makes, their experience different from coming from Latin America or being Latinx in the United States, and really getting a way. I love this idea because it gives you kind of an entry point into talking about culture and how that affects how your lived experiences, right? And how you could be a trailblazer, but that in and of itself is one aspect, and all these other parts of your identity contribute to the way that you live that, right? So I think that's a really great idea. I'm so honored that you took the time to think of all these ideas. Thank you so much for being here and talking about your experience and dual language and bilingual education and your wonderful ideas for Latinitas. I really, really appreciate it. Could you tell us where to find you? Do you have Twitter, Instagram, something like that?
Yes, you could find me using my full name on Twitter. It's ALAINBENGOCHEA.
Okay, thank you.
A true pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.